Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
We've been talking about abortion for several weeks now, and the discussion was spurred on by a Supreme Court decision or the leaked contents of a draft decision by the Supreme Court that would overturn Roe versus Wade.
You mean in the U.S.?
In the United States, yes. And so that prompted our discussion alongside your counseling of some couples who had questions about the embryo or the fetus actually, that was tested and found, they found that there were some medical issues and medical reasons to abort the baby. So they wanted to find out, well, what does Islam have to offer? Can we abort the baby? What do we do? So that spurred our discussion, those two things, and we've come a long way. We've looked at what other religions have said about abortion. We've looked at what the Quran says, and we found that the Quran doesn't really speak very much about abortion. And then we came to the hadith. So maybe you want to jump in there and tell us what we found when we looked at the hadith.
Yeah, so the hadith that says that the soul is blown into the womb of the mother after the child goes through these periods of development would give us 120 days, because it's 40 days for this, then 40 days, then 40 days, for a total of 120. But this hadith has proven to be problematic from a scientific point of view. This is why Jamal Zarabozo, in his commentary on An-Nawawi's 40 hadith, of which this is one of them, he opts for the idea that the three periods are overlapping. But I feel that his argument for them to be overlapping is based on the preconceived notion that the scientific data is correct on this. And you can't have that the soul is blown after the 120 days, because by 40 days, we can see that this is already a live being. And so he opts for that. And also, we have another hadith that says that the angel visits the womb when the child is like 40 days old, or maybe 42, about 6 weeks. So to reconcile with that hadith as well, so it's better to collapse the three periods into one period of 40 days. But then that would mean that the cutoff period for abortions would be 40 days rather than 120 days. And by 40 days, a lot of people may not even know that they're pregnant. And then to discover the genetic deformities later on, this becomes really problematic. It's even problematic for those who live in some parts of Europe and Scandinavia, whom I've had the chance to counsel. Because what happens is that in their countries, abortions are usually basically allowed up until 24 weeks of development. And some of the tests to detect genetic deformities are conducted not long before that to allow that decision period. But by the time the families discover the results of the test, and then they start looking around for which Muslim scholar can give them the Islamic verdict on the issue, a lot of time has passed, and they're close to that 24 weeks, and definitely they've gone past the 120 days. So by the time they consult Muslim scholars, they're being told, no, it's a given, you can't do this. So I've been forced to look back at this and to go to the bottom of it, to the roots, to find out on what is it based. And I found that it is actually based on that hadith, which itself has proven to be problematic, even to Muslim scholars. So I would say that the 120 days rule is not a firm rule, and we've already shown that through the series. It should not be taken as a firm rule, but rather we can see the situation. And abortion should always be avoided. But in the early stages, there is already a classical ruling allowing for it, and I'm not against that. But as we get to that problematic, questionable period, I can say we have a little bit more flexibility. We should always proceed with caution and with medical advice, and not take this lightly, because we're dealing here with a human being, a distinct entity with its own DNA. And left to its own, is going to develop to a human being. So we should leave it alone. But if there are extenuating circumstances, then abortion can be carried out. And the later the pregnancy, like the more developed the pregnancy, the more abhorrent the abortion is.
Dr. Shabir, we also talked about the soul and how it emerges.
Yes. So what we said basically, and there are basically two ideas about the soul. This is even outside of Islam. One is the body-soul dualism, where the body and the soul are two separate things. The soul would be separated, blown into the body, taken out at death. Another is that the soul is an emergent property. Just as the brain develops and the brain has a mind, maybe the soul is something like the mind, the human consciousness that develops along with the brain. And then at death, this consciousness in Muslim belief is preserved and kept as a distinct person without a body. So that's what we would refer to as a soul. So it's an emergent property. It develops with the baby. And just as we read in biological evolution that there are primate beings and then there's a development leading to modern human beings with a highly developed soul and level of consciousness, the others are not devoid of consciousness, but they're getting along there. So in a similar way, the fetus could be developing with a brain and the soul is emerging and developing into a full-fledged human being. But when exactly that happens, that's a mystery. But we can see that the later the pregnancy, the more developed the brain, and therefore it becomes more abhorrent to get rid of this individual. That's a human being with its own DNA and its own soul.
So there you have it. That's the end of our series. I hope it's been useful to our viewers, Dr. Shabir, and helping them to sort through the issues. If they ever come to that situation where they need to decide if they want to have an abortion or not, I hope that this series will be some source of guidance for them.
Yes, and of course, one drawback of this is that it does not give a clear-cut answer as to when exactly you can and cannot, but it leaves a lot of decision-making to the families. But of course, that decision-making should be done with due diligence and in consultation with medical authorities, and also seeking the advice of good Muslim representatives of the faith.
Thank you, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome. Support us today and help us share the message of Islam with people across the globe. Thank you, and may God bless you and your loved ones with the very best always.